We're trying to make sense tonight of what seem alien ideas in the work of a familiar and respected figure. We've interviewed Dr. John Mack a number of times in the past years about nuclear nightmares, about Middle East politics, about mental health services in Cambridge and Somerville, which he largely constructed and designed. The subject for which he is much more widely known this spring and summer and has taken a great deal of heat is the matter of human encounters with aliens. That's the subtitle of his book about the so-called abduction phenomenon. Almost 100 patients now have described to John Mack the experience of confronting furry little bubbleheads from spaceships, UFOs. He says something is happening here, something with meaning for all of us. Dr. Mack, I read your book with great interest on every page, but I also felt, as particularly the 13 case histories were recounted, every one of them sounded to me as if it could be explained as a dream. Call it a vision, maybe a delusion, but a dream. I wonder if you can explain those moments when patients or clients told you stories in a way that you said and had to say to yourself, this is something else.
Often the people themselves will hold it as a dream. They'll say, I had this dream of these beings that came into my room, or
I was sleeping.
Well, that's the question. You know, I say, well, tell me about the dream. For example, Sheila, who was in the book, talked about electrical dreams. Well, I said, tell me about in which she saw these little figures in the room. Well, tell me about this electrical dream. In fact, I talked with her as recently again about it a couple of days ago. And what she describes is lying in her bed at home, but not asleep. And I've gone over that with her many times. These beings came into the room. She felt this humming in her ears. She heard this humming in her ears, felt this tingling, this vibratory feeling in her body, and saw these little figures around her with these huge eyes, and she was frightened. This is an occurrence that took place about 9 years ago, and she made a particular point. I wasn't actually asking her this, but she made a particular point in another context of saying, I was not asleep. I was wide awake when this happened.
I've had that experience. I used to call them waking nightmares. After I'd broken a leg, I was about 12 years old, and I was absolutely awake and had a distinct sense of a presence in the room. I forget what they looked like, but my father, and in fact the doctor, explained it as a sort of post-shock response of the body. I was encouraged not to worry about it, never came back. What made it meaningful in the case of Sheila?
When somebody describes a state of consciousness, you quiz them on it, you press them on it. How do you know you're awake? I was clearly awake. This happened to me. They experience it as an occurrence, as a narrative, completely different than dreams they've had. In other words, I spend a lot of time going over these experiences with people and how are they distinct from dreams. And they're very clear about that. A dream is something that has a sense of unreality. They wake up from it, they look back, they know that this was a dream. In the case of these experiences, they feel that this is something that has really happened to them. Whether it happened to them in the state of consciousness with which we are familiar, which we call ordinary waking state, or some other state of consciousness, I don't know. We have very limited language for talking about consciousness, but clearly it is not a sleep state to them. It is a state of being awake, present. This is really happening. It follows a course. There's a narrative, a beginning, an end, and afterwards, when they reflect upon it, they recall it like a real experience, and they distinguish
many dreams
that
like that, and I think a lot of people have.
Well,
the first case history in the book, a young man recalled his sleeping in a nash in Algonquin, Maine, had a dream, sounded like a wet dream, seemed very, very familiar. I was troubled by that lack of a clear border between dreams and what you proceed to call abduction experiences.
They have, the narratives are very complex. They are consistent among different people. They involve going up into the ships. They involve experiences which they are not familiar with in the literature or in the media. They follow a consistent course. Dreams are rather individual, as you know. You have a dream, it's your dream. And when you hear that 90 people or whatever number of people have had very similar dreams with a text quite like yours, and then when you compare that with someone else, you're shocked, you're disturbed, because that disturbs your equilibrium. You thought this was your private story, and then you become affected by the fact that that other person had the same set of events, saw the same beings, was in the ship, had the same instruments. Dreams, in my experience, aren't like that. Dreams are quite idiosyncratic. They may have common symbolic elements, but certain trees, certain...
I want to challenge you on that. I mean, in a sense, for example, everybody I know has had the dream of showing up for an important interview or test or something, and your pants aren't on, or you're naked. We don't conclude, and that is a sort of universal dream. Or people who've gone to college and wake up in their 50s saying, or thinking, having a dream that they forgot to study for that biology course that they had forgotten they signed up for. I still have dreams like that.
But this is different. Yeah, go ahead.
But all I mean to say is that a common dream theme doesn't make, in my sense, doesn't give the dream material any reality. The thing that puzzles me most in the book is that you speak of aliens' abduction experiences as if they were the real thing. And I read the book and I say, no. There's no aliens in this story. It's just people dreaming of aliens, like people dreaming of going to the prom, without their pants on.
I mean, you can keep calling it a dream, and yet it doesn't have the characteristics of a dream as I experience it. For example, many of the cases occur during the daytime. People are driving a car. Several people will have the same experience. John Carpenter, who's a psychiatric social worker in Missouri, has a dozen cases where he's interviewed people independently, and they tell precisely the same story of what happened to them on the ship. In one pair, he has over 40 elements that correspond exactly of details that occurred on the ship or in the ship. Dreams are not like that in my experience. And also you have all these other corroborating elements, the physical findings that go along with it, the cuts, the scoop marks, the lesions on the people's bodies that they report afterwards, the independent association. All explainable to me, it seemed, in alternative ways, not necessarily dismissible, but explainable in other ways. Well, then you get into the question of what our own mindsets are. I mean, okay, it reaches a point where I'm not going to argue about it. In other words, if people are witnessing UFOs, for example, there's one of the cases, Catherine, where I recently reported early in March of '91 an abduction experience in Saugus, north of Boston, and recently she was shocked because a scientist independently investigated what was then called a meteor, but which behaved like a UFO because it moved in all kinds of different directions, different than a meteor, and followed the course just where she had been independently. He followed all the different media reports of this tracking of this object, and it corresponded precisely to where one of its places, to where she experienced her abduction. When she heard about this, she was shocked, upset, because again, like you're doing, each of these people, and I too, holds this reserve in their mind. This can't be. This is just not possible in our reality. And it may not be true, and yet it keeps consistently reports that I can't explain come up. And so then I begin to look at ourselves, and I say, well, all right, I can't argue this on the basis of evidence totally, because it's subtle, it's consistent, it's powerful to me, but it's not evidence that would satisfy the mindset that we have. So then I say, well, wait a minute, is there maybe something in the way we look at reality, or the way what we require in the way of evidence to change our point of view about something? Is there something about us? In other words, maybe there is nothing in the way of evidence that would satisfy us. Maybe it would require some kind of shift from within ourselves, some stretching to meet something, which to me is a powerful, unexplained phenomenon. Let's agree that the evidence itself is not absolutely conclusive, one way or the other. I'm as much interested by now, especially because the book has been out a while, in what you've learned, what we've learned, about the argument.
about the resistance to your view, about the tremendous enthusiasm in certain parts of the media for your view. It gets a great hearing on talk radio. It gets a very hard put down in some of the critical press, including the news magazines and the New Republic. What do you make of the resistance so far? Why is the world so determined, including me, not to deal with this not to deal with these stories as fact or as truth?
Well, if this is true, then it shatters just about everything that we've come to believe, that intelligence cannot manifest within the universe, or if it does, it doesn't cross over and show up in the physical world, that there's a sacred barrier that we've created over 300 years now between the mythic world, the world of the imagination, the world of dreams, if you will, the world of spirit.
Who says we don't believe in that stuff?
Well, some people do. I mean,
I think most people
that may
do.
that may be the fraction of the culture that accepts this. I mean, that there is a fraction that says, well, of course there could be all kinds of intelligences, and that they could take any odd form, and this particular form may have found its way to enter into our physical reality.
But, thousands of people by now have gone to Lourdes to see, the site of the miracle of Our Lady of Lourdes. It's not as if our culture, our Western European American culture, doesn't believe in that stuff. We do believe. I mean, it's essential in the Judeo-Christian tradition, the notion of an interventionist God, a real God to whom people pray, a God who performs miracles at the Red Sea, but in a lot of individual lives, a healing God. I wonder, in that sense, if you don't overestimate the reign of sort of scientific materialistic thought in the world.
Yes, and from those, I mean, for example, I discussed this with Tibetan Buddhists, this phenomenon, and they said, high lamas, and they had no trouble appreciating.
But what about Orthodox rabbis or Catholic priests, for that matter?
I haven't particularly discussed it with that group, but the point is, we're dealing with a culture in which the demand for physical evidence before something is called real is very strong, and it's in that segment that I can't meet the argument. So is that my evidence is largely psychological, and as I make a certain assessment clinically that these are encounters, experiences, a detailed narrative reported with intense feeling among people that strike me as quite healthy and who I've done extensive psychological workups on and psychiatric workups on, and I can't account for their having these experiences, and there are associated corroborating pieces of physical evidence. Now, as a package, there is something powerful here that seems to me quite mysterious. I can't account for it. Now, does that mean it's going to convince somebody that wants the smoking gun, dinner plate off of a UFO? No, it's not. But then the whole universe, as we understand subatomic matter, is probabilistic, is variable, is wave in one context, particle in another. There are uncertainties, but there's as far as I talk with these individuals, something is entering into our world powerfully that, whether we say it comes from their psyches or it comes from the outside world. I mean, Thomas Kuhn asked me even to suspend that category of outside and inside. It may be all corresponding in some way.
Have you ever seen faith healing? I mean, and I'm not talking about anything terribly exotic. I mean, there was a Father McDonough who did a great deal of it at the Mission Church in Boston, may still be doing it for all I know. But I've seen people come up on crutches and walk away on their own 2 feet.
Well, but again,
is that related?
No, but I mean, again, if you're going to need to have some evidence that the person really was healed, that this really occurred. I mean, and there's gathering evidence going along here that people have in fact had these physical encounters, the association with the UFOs that have been independently seen. I mean, there's a gathering body of evidence in this field. Now, it's not robust enough to satisfy the purely physical demand for evidence, but
is it more or less real than the experience of healing by faith, do you think?
I mean, that's a whole other area. I don't know. I haven't studied that enough to know. I mean, you say you know about that.
I don't know much about it, but
these strike me as people. I mean, I haven't studied the people that have been healed by faith. These are not the kind of people that would be subjectively give way to that kind of thing, as I understand it, but I don't know enough about it. These are very hard-headed, critical people who don't believe this themselves, who are not looking for it, who don't want it to be so, who are unhappy that it's so. It's not healing anything for them. They have nothing to gain by it. They don't want to come on the media. They don't say they've been helped, healed. They wish it weren't so. I mean, it's not. It isn't a phenomenon like that.
I want to change the subject a little bit, but to another area that kept coming back in my mind. There's a subtext sort of from the encounters and from the aliens that there's a warning, a kind of biblical prophecy warning that capitalism, warfare is destroying the planet, and sort of get serious about this, that people come away with that sort of moral. I kept wondering, what if the message from the aliens was stop communism, or buy Oldsmobiles, for that matter? What if or maybe what if it was simply in an old-fashioned way, repent? Or what if the message was, praise God and love your neighbor? Isn't the message itself a little too easy, and in that sense suspect?
Yeah, but you're reducing it to a kind of absurdity. I mean, the message comes through in a certain context where there is a global crisis. These are not people that are particularly environmentally oriented, and yet they're shaken by this powerful communication about what is happening to the planet, and they are not the kind of people that would necessarily come up with that, and that is a subtext, and it is framed, and it is coming across in a way that is highly relevant to the reality of our time. I mean, it's not those other things, because it is what it is, and that's
no, but I think you could also
it's not
say,
a simple message either.
No, but reading it, I could also see that what the message to these people, and the message that we all kind of intuitively understand, is things can't go on this way. I mean, whether that's real or an unreal warning, we always have that feeling in one fashion or another, things can't go on this way.
So it's consistent with a lot that we already know.
But it's also a kind of banality. It's almost sort of an empty warning.
Well, if you reduce it to an empty warning, it's an empty warning. If you feel it deep in your tissues as something the most powerful kind of communication that you can imagine, and it's full of elaboration and subtlety and images, and you feel it in your body, then it's not banal. I mean, it's banal if you reduce it to a kind of environmentalist homily or something of that kind. But as experienced and as the people go through it, it's not banal at all. It shakes up people from every part of the culture when they go through this.
No, but to me, the whole story would be, of an alien message, would be more convincing if the message weren't so obvious. The message is really pretty, and if it weren't, in a certain way, so consistent with John Mack's politics and John Mack's
it's consistent
worldview.
with anybody's politics or worldview, because we all know what we're dealing with, and it's a certain, maybe in this sense, that it taps our own unconscious, our own consciousness, or the inside-outside relationship, which is in some ways in harmony with each other. In other words, that perhaps it is in some way tapping into some deep unconscious force, and that we know into our very bones.
Well, I think we all know. We do know. We don't need aliens to tell us. Well, we ought to simplify our lives.
Well,
we ought to live.
But so what? I mean, so you say we don't need the aliens to tell us that, but I'm reporting what goes on. The fact that you say we don't need it is irrelevant to the situation. This is what I'm reporting. You can say we don't need it. Okay, so you say we don't need it. I mean, let's do it for ourselves. Let's find all the other. Let's put this together with all the environmental scientists that are telling us the same thing. The government policymakers that are telling us the same thing. The corporate leaders that are absolutely committed to sustainable kinds of construction on the planet. There's all sorts of. Nobody, surely not me, is going to say, well, because this is the experience of abductees in their encounters, therefore that has some special environmental power. It's one other reminder, it's one kind of set of experiences, data, encounters, whatever you want to call it, that goes along with what we basically deep down no.
No, but if the subtext of this whole book is A, tune into another kind of reality and a more mysterious sort of spirituality, and B, stop destroying the planet with technology and warfare, why, and if the aliens are in a certain sense a kind of metaphor of warning, why confuse it all with the story of UFOs of which we've never seen a good photograph?
I don't know. I'm telling you, this is what we have. I mean, you're saying, why should this be? I don't know. I don't know who the aliens are. I don't know who their handlers are. I don't know who our handlers are. You're trying to, I think, reduce this to sort of the kind of way we think about things, sort of rationalist way. Let's get this. It should go the way we think about things, and I don't think it does.
No, because I think, in fact, I want to consider myself wide open to all manner of spirituality and mystery, but I also think that we all feel warnings, whether in dreams or visions or not, that and always have, that we should repent, we should honor God, honor our Creator, live our lives better.
You're reducing it to kind of banal homilies. I mean, this comes across sometimes with great intensity, subtlety, complexity, richness to these individuals who are not often...
And unprovability, you'd also have to say.
What?
And unverifiability, you'd also have to say.
Yeah, I mean, but it's a communication from some place, whether it's from their unconscious. They're not the kind of people that would be thinking this way on their own. Something is reaching them, and it's not from the media. I mean, I don't know what the source of it is. But
we never know. I mean,
I know. Well, why isn't it done a different way? Why doesn't it show up in some more gross way? I don't know. I mean, I know what I report, but I don't know the answers to why it isn't some other way.
I know a poet who described rather vividly on television, feeling a sort of a poem coming on. He drove off the road and wrote it right down never changed a word of it. Hadn't thought about it before. He must have been thinking about all his life. It was about a childhood experience of a swing on a walnut tree. Yeah. There was no explaining exactly why all the words and the meters came together at that moment, but he didn't have to resort to a notion of alien creatures or UFOs to explain, to account for the onset of this explosion of insight.
Well, I've actually talked with artists and musicians who do not credit their own unconscious for the source of their material. They say it is there, it is present in the universe. And one composer who was a friend of mine described this like a stream that runs through, that is in the universe, and that he takes cups of it, but it's not from him, it's someplace in a larger reality.
Johannes Brahms spoke almost in exactly those terms of being at one with the Maker, letting God in effect write his symphonies.
I don't have a problem with that.
I don't have any problem with that language.
That this in some way comes from some other more spiritual place. What is particular about this, seems to me, is that it has this kind of teasing hard edge of physical reality with the UFOs, with the lesions on people's bodies, with the reports that people are actually missing during these experiences. Again, not physical penetration to the point where it's going to satisfy us that it's proof or that it's adequate evidence within our material framework, but it has. I think it's that which has gotten us to notice this phenomenon, that it does have this kind of consistency of narrative and these associated physical elements in it, and that's that's what I wanted. What makes this? I mean, never mind John Mack, and I'm a recent chronicler of it, but this has been. We've been struggling with this. It's been in the media. There have been mini-series, there have been movies. Travis Walton, who's an ordinary guy, a regular guy,
I
a
do want to
logger
focus
down
on
in
John Mack.
Well,
because you are in a certain sense the verifier of this whole idea for a lot of people. One woman said to you, she dismissed these things as nightmares until she saw Harvard after your name and thought, well, that man's worth talking to. Other people have wondered if you didn't have Harvard by your name, whether we'd even be talking about it.
But there's been a great interest in this culture and this phenomenon long before John Mack got involved in it, from Bud Hopkins, from David Jacobs, and they, in fact, I think more than I believe this is happening, this baby project is happening literally in the physical world as we know it. I have some question about that, but this has been there, unsolved mysteries. Granted, my getting into this meant that it's being looked at more in the center of the culture, and that's happening, and there's this discussion. We're having this dialogue, and that's to the good. But I don't want to be put in the position of claiming more for this than it deserves. In other words, I think it is provocative. It's important in the sense that it makes us think. There's something occurring which I don't think can be accounted for in simple ways with dreams or fantasy or cultural delusion or something like that. But I don't know what it is.
Fair enough. I don't know what more to add. That's a very interesting account, and let's leave it in a certain realm of mystery there.
Good.
With respect for the subject and with great respect for you.
All right.
John Mack, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris.